The Tavern's Summons. Chapter 1: The Tavern's Summons. The first thing to arrive is pressure, as if reality itself has inhaled too deeply and forgotten how to release it. Space fractures without symmetry or warning, not like glass, but like something organic being torn open from the inside. And in that rupture, multiple isolated realities collapse into a single impossible structure. The tavern is not built so much as asserted into existence, a vast Gothic mass of shifting architecture that behaves like a living organism made of stone and geometry that refuses to obey consistency. Stairways lead into ceilings that also function as floors. Arches curve inward like remembering bones, and suspended platforms drift through invisible currents as though gravity is negotiable but unwilling to admit it. Above it all hangs the karma scale, enormous and perfectly balanced, not because equilibrium has been achieved, but because imbalance has not yet been permitted to matter. It does not swing or tilt. It simply exists as judgment waiting for input. They arrive violently all at once, not summoned but ripped into place as if something outside them has grabbed every isolated existence and forced them into a shared frame. Kalen is the first to stabilize awareness, his temporal compass flaring with instability as the golden reflections in his eyes flicker like broken clockwork. His aged right hand twitches involuntarily, the weight of future decay reacting before thought can intervene. Cal manifests above and forward of him in mid-motion, rifle already single-handedly half-raised on instinct, body adjusting to threat before there is anything to aim at. Bram drops next, hitting the unstable ground in a crouched impact that fractures stone outward in a slow cracking bloom. His right arm, encased in molten iron forged permanence, radiates heat in steady pulses as though the forge that made it never fully cooled. Silas arrives differently, less like falling and more like being instantiated, his lower body fully replaced by luminous cyan-armored structure that slams into conceptual ground and defines it, anchoring shifting reality beneath him as if refusing permission for collapse. From his shoulders, Seraphina and Morvath immediately orient outward, silent but already calculating. The remaining arrivals complete the convergence. Zalthun manifests as a distortion in perception first, void-born and listening rather than seeing, their eyeless form sending out sickly burgundy waves that map the environment through absence. Lord Orion appears in enforced authority, black iron armor and corrupted yellow, sunblade igniting the space with doctrinal light, his presence immediately attempting to impose hierarchy onto chaos. Vexus drops beside him in controlled descent, ash-blackened scales, and a hollow chest wound pulsing faintly with residual catastrophe. Gideon and Maeve arrive intertwined but not unified, stabilizing each other out of instinct rather than certainty. Gideon already robbed of future sight, and Maeve's floral magic flickering uncertainly in response to the hostility of the space. Dravok arrives last in impact rather than landing, his molten, weaponized arms carving into the ground as heat blooms outward and reality briefly softens under thermal overload. For a suspended moment, all of them exist within the same impossible architecture, each one recalibrating to the sudden collapse of isolation into forced proximity. Then the karma scale above them shifts, not in tilt or imbalance, but in attention, as if it has registered the full set of variables and begun processing them as a system rather than individuals. The tavern breathes, and in that breath, a single rule begins to form without language, only consequence. Everything here will respond. Silence follows, not peace but anticipation, the kind that exists immediately before violence becomes inevitable. The silence does not last long enough to become comfort, only long enough to become recognition. The gathered figures begin to understand in different ways and at different speeds that this space is not neutral. It is not a meeting ground or a refuge. It is a forced convergence chamber built to provoke a reaction, and the tavern does not care what that reaction is so long as it occurs. Lord Orion is the first to oblige it. He steps forward with deliberate authority, each movement of his heavy black iron armor sounding like a sentence being enforced rather than a man walking. The corrupted yellow light of the shattered sunblade intensifies as he raises it slightly, not in direct attack but in declaration. His voice carries without effort, as if the architecture itself has decided to repeat it. Order begins now. All who resist will be classified as deviation. The words are not aimed at individuals. They are aimed at the concept of disorder itself. For a moment, there is a fragile hesitation in the room, as if chaos is briefly considering structure. Vexus shifts subtly behind Orion, ash-blackened scales catching the yellow glow as though weighing loyalty against survival. Zalthun, the Void Caller, tilts their eyeless face toward the sound, listening through burgundy echolocation waves that distort and return fragmented meaning. Kalen feels his temporal compass flare in response, not to Orion's presence, but to the imposition of control itself, while his aged right hand tightens involuntarily, as if anticipating outcomes that have not yet arrived. Bram steps forward only enough to change the air pressure around him, his molten iron arm radiating a slow, oppressive heat that makes the space feel more volatile without yet becoming aggressive. Silas remains grounded, his luminous cyan-armored lower body locked into the unstable architecture as though refusing permission for collapse. Seraphina and Morvath speak within him at the same time, neither agreeing with the other, both already calculating probability. Gideon does not move, but he is no longer still. He is listening in a way that replaces sight, while Maeve's hand tightens around his arm as her cherry blossom magic flickers uneasily in the hostile atmosphere. Cal adjusts position without ceremony, shifting elevation slightly as a sniper's instinct reorganizes the battlefield into potential lines of threat. His rifle does not aim at anyone yet, but everything about him suggests that it already has. Zalthun responds. The Void Caller does not move forward so much as the space around them begins to interpret absence. Burgundy waves spread outward in slow, precise distortions, passing through every figure and returning information that is not visual but conceptual: strength, instability, authority, fracture points. Orion feels it immediately. The Sunblade's yellow light flickers for the first time, not dimming but misaligning, as if the idea of authority is no longer perfectly anchored to reality. His armor creaks under a pressure that is not physical, and for the first time since arriving, he turns his attention fully towards something he does not control. Silas notices the shift and does not intervene. Bram exhales once, heat intensifying along his molten arm. Kalen's temporal compass spikes sharply, reacting to a branching outcome that should not yet exist. And Zalthun speaks without sound, the tavern translating the absence into language anyway. Structure is only valid while it survives contact. The words do not echo, they settle. Orion understands too late that he is no longer defining order. He is inside a system that has already begun deciding what order costs. The tavern does not react with violence. It reacts with focus, as if it has just begun watching more closely. Orion does not retreat, because retreat would imply he has accepted a higher authority than his own. Instead, he reinforces it. The yellow light of the shattered sunblade intensifies until it is no longer illumination but pressure, pressing outward through the architecture, as if attempting to force the tavern itself into submission. Black iron plates along his armor shift and lock, each movement accompanied by the sound of doctrine being sealed. All entities within range will comply, he declares, and this time his voice is sharper, less ceremonial, more desperate in its certainty. Vexus does not speak, but he moves closer to Orion's flank, a silent alignment that suggests calculation rather than loyalty. Zalthun tilts their head slightly, burgundy void waves expanding again. but slower this time, more deliberate, as if studying the reaction to the previous sentence. The waves pass through Orion and return altered, no longer mapping him as dominant but as increasingly isolated. Kalen feels the temporal compass react again, its golden flicker destabilizing as multiple outcome paths begin collapsing into a narrower set of violent probabilities. His aged right hand trembles once, involuntary, as if remembering a future where this moment has already ended badly. Bram shifts his weight forward, molten iron arm lowering slightly, heat radiating in controlled pulses rather than aggression. He is not attacking, but he is no longer passive either. The air around him thickens, reacting to temperature and intent. Silas remains grounded in place, luminous cyan armor holding firm against the shifting geometry beneath him. But his posture subtly adjusts as Seraphina and Morveth continue their internal contradiction, one urging containment, the other anticipating collapse. Gideon finally turns his head slightly toward Orion, not because he sees him, but because he feels the structure of control pressing against the space like a weight trying to define direction where none has been agreed upon. Cal raises his rifle just enough for the motion to register as readiness rather than threat, his position now fully integrated into the spatial tension of the room. He is not aiming at Orion specifically, but at the concept of whoever moves first. Orion notices this. That is the second mistake. His authority requires recognition to function, and the room is beginning to stop giving it to him. The sunblade flares brighter as if compensating, and for a moment the yellow light pushes outward violently enough that the surrounding stone fractures into glowing seams. "You will obey structure," he says again, but the sentence is no longer absolute. It now carries friction. Zalthun responds without speaking again, and the burgundy waves tighten rather than expand, compressing the space around Orion's declaration instead of dispersing it. The effect is subtle at first, almost invisible, but the sunblade's glow begins to stutter in response, like a signal losing synchronization. Vexus shifts again, and this time it is not alignment but hesitation. Silas's cyan armor hum deepens slightly as if detecting systemic instability, and Bram's molten arm cools a fraction, not in relief but in recalibration. Kalen's temporal compass flickers harder, locking briefly onto a branching outcome where Orion is no longer central to the equation at all. Gideon's expression does not change, but something in his posture tightens, as if he has just recognized that authority here is not granted but tested continuously, and that failure is immediate. Then without warning, the tavern responds, not to violence, not to speech, but to the breakdown of hierarchical agreement itself. The architecture subtly shifts, not collapsing but reinterpreting weight distribution, and for the first time since arrival, Orion's presence does not stabilize the room. It competes with it. The room does not escalate all at once. It escalates in layers, as if the tavern is testing how much contradiction reality can tolerate before it begins to fail. Orion's authority no longer stabilizes anything. It simply occupies space, competing with the quiet, expanding pressure of Zalthun's presence. The Void Caller does not move, but their silence is no longer passive. It is active subtraction, a force that makes certainty thinner wherever it spreads. Vexus shifts again behind Orion, and the movement is no longer aligned with command, but with uncertainty, his ash-blackened form reflecting the yellow light in fractured patterns that no longer feel loyal. Kalen feels it first in his temporal compass, a violent stutter in probability that does not resolve into clarity but into compression. His aged right hand twitches once, fingers curling as if trying to grasp a version of time that is being erased mid-thought. Bram's molten iron arm emits a low, unstable heat, no longer steady forge energy but reactive tension, as if the metal itself is responding to the presence of competing systems. Silas remains grounded, cyan-armored lower body locked into the shifting architecture, but even his stabilization is beginning to feel less like control and more like resistance against something larger recalculating the floor beneath them. Gideon stands still, but stillness is no longer neutral. It is an adaptation without direction. Maeve's grip tightens on his arm, cherry blossom magic flickering weaker now, not because it is failing, but because the environment is beginning to define it as irrelevant. Cal adjusts his stance again, micro movements refining his sightlines, but even his precision feels increasingly like an attempt to track something that refuses to stay within a single interpretation of space. Orion speaks again, but his voice has changed. It is no longer declarative, it is compensatory. All resistance will be corrected. The sunblade flares in response, but the light is no longer pure dominance. It fractures slightly at the edges, as if the concept of correction is no longer universally accepted by the space it is meant to enforce. Zalthun tilts their head, and the burgundy waves they emit slow, not in retreat but in focus, narrowing onto Orion with a precision that feels less like observation and more like classification. Vexus takes a half step backward. It is small, almost imperceptible, but in this room it is catastrophic in meaning. Loyalty is no longer a fixed state, it is becoming conditional. Silas's cyan armor emits a faint resonance as if recognizing a structural threshold being crossed. Bram exhales, heat rising and falling in uneven pulses. Kalen's temporal compass flickers violently, briefly showing him an outcome where Orion is already irrelevant before the moment has finished happening. Then the tavern changes tone, not visually, not physically, systemically, harmonically. The architecture subtly shifts its weight distribution again, and for the first time Orion's presence does not anchor anything around him. It competes, and competition in this space is indistinguishable from vulnerability. Somewhere deeper in the structure, unseen and unacknowledged, something begins to respond to the imbalance, not with correction, but with anticipation. Far below the visible layers of this convergence, something else begins to move for the first time. Not yet present, not yet defined, but already arriving. Orion realizes too late that command only functions when it is accepted, and the room has begun quietly refusing him without announcing it. The sunblade still burns with corrupted yellow intensity, but the light no longer defines the space around it. It now competes with it, flickering at the edges as if the tavern itself is no longer treating it as a dominant signal. Vexus stands just behind Orion, no longer fully aligned, his ash-blackened form reflecting hesitation in subtle micromovements that betray calculation over loyalty. Zalthun does not advance, does not retreat, simply remains present in a way that feels increasingly like absence expanding outward rather than a body occupying space. And every step of that absence makes the room less certain about what Orion is supposed to be. Kalen's temporal compass stutters again, this time more sharply, locking briefly onto multiple incompatible outcomes that collapse almost immediately, leaving only instability in their place. His aged right hand tightens, trembles, then relaxes as if it is trying to remember whether it belongs to a timeline where control still exists. Bram shifts his molten iron arm slightly forward, heat pulsing in uneven rhythm now, less like a forge and more like a weapon, deciding whether it has been given permission to exist. Silas remains grounded, cyan-armored lower body immovable, but even his stability feels less like dominance and more like holding back a system that is beginning to exceed containment. Seraphina and Morvath speak at once inside him, contradictory and immediate, neither agreeing on whether this is containment or collapse. Gideon finally turns his head fully toward Orion, not in recognition of the man, but in recognition of the concept of command failing in real time. Maeve's hand tightens again, cherry blossom magic flickering weaker, as the environment continues to define it as non-essential. Cal adjusts his rifle angle by degrees that are almost invisible, but every adjustment now feels less like targeting and more like preparing for something that cannot yet be identified as a target. Orion raises the sunblade higher, and for a moment it surges, forcing a spike of yellow light through the room as if attempting to reassert dominance by sheer volume of presence. "Final warning," he declares, but the words do not land with the same structural weight as before. They scatter slightly in the air, failing to fully organize into obedience. Zalthun responds by compressing the burgundy waves inward again, and this time the effect is immediate and visible. The sunblade's light fractures at the center line, as if its authority is being interrupted at the conceptual source. Vexus takes another step back, and this time it is no longer subtle. It is separation. Silas's cyan armor emits a low harmonic tone, reacting to the breakdown of hierarchical stability. Bram exhales, heat stabilizing into controlled aggression. Kalen's compass briefly locks, and what it shows him is not victory or defeat, but divergence, multiple factions forming before the first true conflict has even begun. The tavern acknowledges the fracture openly, not through sound or collapse, but through structural redefinition, as if the space itself has decided that Orion is no longer a fixed point in its equation, only a variable under stress. Orion feels it before he understands it, a subtle but undeniable shift in how the room responds to his presence, as if the space is no longer reinforcing his authority, but merely allowing it to exist as one possibility among many. The sunblade still burns with corrupted yellow intensity, yet the light now behaves inconsistently, flaring and dimming at the edges like a signal losing synchronization with its source. His armor, heavy black iron layered in doctrinal mass, no longer sounds like certainty when he moves. It sounds like resistance against something that is not physically pushing back, but conceptually refusing him. Vexus remains behind him, but the distance between them has changed in a way that is not spatial but interpretive, as though loyalty itself is no longer a fixed alignment, but a condition being reevaluated in real time. Zalthun remains still, and that stillness is now the dominant force in the room. The burgundy void waves they emit are no longer expanding or probing, they are refining, tightening into a field of perception that removes certainty from anything it touches. Orion's command structure, once absolute in his mind, now feels exposed within that field, stripped of assumed weight. When he speaks again, his voice is unchanged in volume but diminished in effect. "You will recognize order," he says, but the sentence does not enforce itself the way it used to. It simply exists, waiting for acceptance that does not come. Kalen's temporal compass reacts violently, not by showing him a single outcome, but by fragmenting into overlapping futures that cancel each other out as soon as they form. His aged right hand twitches again, slower this time, as if the weight of time itself is no longer consistent in its pressure. Bram's molten iron arm pulses with uneven heat, reacting to the instability in the room like a weapon sensing that the battlefield rules are changing mid-conflict. Silas remains grounded, his luminous cyan-armored lower body holding firm against the shifting architecture, but even his stability now reads as opposition rather than neutrality. Seraphina and Morvath continue their internal contradiction, one reading containment protocols, the other anticipating systemic collapse, neither able to fully override the other. Gideon stands motionless, but the space around him is no longer neutral. Without sight, he interprets the room through pressure, sound, and absence, and what he perceives is not Orion as a leader, but Orion as a structure under failure. Maeve's grip tightens once more, but her magic flickers unevenly now, cherry blossom energy struggling to maintain coherence in an environment that is beginning to reject symbolic stability. Cal shifts his stance slightly, rifle still raised but no longer anchored to a clear hierarchy of targets. His focus is no longer on individuals, but on the likelihood of imminent rupture, because everything in the room now suggests that rupture is no longer optional, only delayed. Orion attempts to reassert control through escalation. The sunblade flares brighter than before, pushing out a wave of corrupted yellow light that briefly forces the architecture to react, stone surfaces tightening and reshaping, as if attempting to comply. For a fraction of a second, it appears as though authority might reestablish itself through force of output alone. Then Zalthun compresses the void field inward, and the effect reverses instantly, not by counterattack but by removal of structure that the light depends on. The flare collapses unevenly, like a declaration losing its language mid-sentence. Vexus shifts again, and this time there is no ambiguity left in the movement. It is no longer proximity to command. It is far from instability. Silas's cyan armor hum deepens, recognizing the shift as systemic failure rather than isolated. Comcast, Bram exhales slowly, heat stabilizing into readiness. Kalen's compass locks briefly onto a branching future where Orion is no longer present in the center of the equation at all, and the result does not resolve into clarity, only acceleration. The tavern, for the first time since their arrival, stops treating Orion as an anchor point and begins treating him as something else entirely, an outcome that has not yet been finalized. The space begins to feel less like a gathering and more like a system still loading its final participants. Orion's authority continues to degrade in real time, not through outright collapse but through gradual non-recognition, as if the tavern is slowly forgetting that he was ever meant to be central. The sunblade still burns, but its corrupted yellow light now behaves like a fragmented signal, strong in bursts and absent in others, each fluctuation weakening the illusion of control he is trying to maintain. Vexus no longer mirrors him cleanly. His ash-blackened form shifts in small, unreadable adjustments that suggest recalibration rather than allegiance. The void caller, Zalthun, remains still, but their silence has expanded into something structural, a burgundy absence that subtly reorganizes perception around it. Kalen's temporal compass continues to fracture into overlapping probabilities that never fully resolve, and his aged right hand remains tense, as though it is holding onto a timeline that refuses to stabilize. Bram stands ready, molten iron arm glowing in controlled heat pulses that now feel less like aggression and more like preparation for inevitable structural failure. Silas remains grounded in luminous cyan armor, unmoving but fully aware, his presence acting as a stabilizing contradiction in a space that is increasingly rejecting stability itself. Seraphina and Morvath continue their dual commentary within him, neither resolving their disagreement, both reacting to shifts in systemic pressure. Gideon remains still, but his awareness is now entirely non-visual, reading the room through pressure and absence, while Maeve's cherry blossom magic flickers weaker, struggling against an environment that is beginning to suppress symbolic coherence. Cal adjusts again, but the adjustment is no longer tactical in the traditional sense. It is adaptive, responding to a battlefield that is no longer fixed enough to aim at consistently. Every potential target now behaves like a probability rather than a position. Then the tavern completes another layer of its convergence. Dravok arrives, not as an introduction but as rupture. The air ignites before his body fully stabilizes into existence, heat distortion warping the space around him as his fused, weaponized arms carve into reality itself on impact. His presence does not land like the others. It overwhelms the immediate environment, forcing the architecture to react thermally as stone and air both recoil from his intensity. The molten force embedded in his form radiates outward in aggressive pulses, and for the first time since the convergence began, the space is forced to acknowledge raw environmental dominance rather than conceptual authority. Orion turns slightly toward the disturbance, but the movement lacks certainty. The Sunblade flares in response, attempting to categorize Dravok's arrival as a threat, but the classification does not fully stabilize. Zalthun's void waves immediately expand toward the new presence, mapping it not as form, but as destructive potential. Bram's molten arm reacts instinctively, heat rising in recognition rather than opposition, as if two forged systems briefly acknowledging each other across incompatible origins. Kalen's temporal compass spikes violently at Dravok's arrival, not because of him alone, but because his presence destabilizes the already fractured probability field. His aged right hand tightens again, sharper this time, as if the future itself has begun to resist being observed. Silas's cyan-armored lower body emits a low structural resonance, detecting a new variable of catastrophic scale entering the equation. Seraphina and Morvath both go silent for a fraction of a second before resuming, now in agreement only that containment is no longer a sufficient response category. And then, as if the system is correcting for imbalance, Valerius arrives.
Thank you for tuning in.
He does not enter with impact or flame, but with fracture. The air around him seems to split along invisible seams as his presence resolves into space, the abyssal purple of his corrupted, crystallized blade already visible before his full form is understood. The flayed reality of his existence drags into alignment behind him, cold and unstable, introducing a different kind of pressure into the room, one that does not burn or collapse, but erodes. For a brief moment, all existing forces, authority, void, heat, structure, and probability, exist in the same space without agreement on dominance. Orion, Dravok, Valerius, Zalthun, Silas, Kalen, Bram, Gideon, Maeve, Cal, Vexus, and the rest of the Convergence now occupy a single unresolved system. The tavern does not expand further. It simply finishes assembling its participants, waits for the first true fracture to complete itself. The Convergence stabilizes, but only in the most dangerous sense of the word. Nothing is moving anymore because everything is now fully present. The tavern no longer feels like it is assembling missing pieces. It feels like it has finished compiling a complete system and is waiting to observe what breaks first. Orion still attempts to occupy the role of command, but even he can sense the shift now. Authority is no longer being rejected outright. It is being ignored as a non-essential variable. The Sunblade continues to burn with corrupted yellow intensity, yet its light no longer defines hierarchy. It merely marks his position in space. Zalthun remains unchanged, but their presence has become more invasive through stillness alone. The burgundy void waves no longer scan the room. They simply exist, subtly rewriting perception wherever attention lands. Dravok's arrival has altered the environment permanently, heat distortion lingering in the air like a memory of violence waiting to repeat. Valerius stands opposite that heat in cold contrast, abyssal purple blade held low, his presence eroding rather than dominating, as if the concept of stability itself is being slowly flayed away in his proximity. Kalen's temporal compass is no longer stuttering randomly, it is narrowing. The branching futures are collapsing into fewer, more violent outcomes, each one more immediate than the last. His aged right hand remains tense, not shaking now but held in controlled readiness, as if accepting that time here will not behave in a linear or forgiving way. Bram shifts slightly, molten iron arm lowering just enough to suggest he is no longer reacting to Orion at all, but to the broader field of threats now occupying the same space. Silas remains grounded, cyan-armored lower body locked into the architecture, but even his stabilization feels like resistance against an emerging consensus that chaos is becoming structured. Gideon stands still, his perception entirely absent of sight, yet fully aware of pressure distribution across the room. He is no longer interpreting individuals. He is interpreting imbalance. Maeve remains close, but her cherry blossom magic flickers more faintly now, as though the environment is beginning to decide which forms of life it will allow to remain expressive. Cal adjusts his stance again, but the adjustment is smaller now, more constrained, as if even his distance-based certainty is being compressed by the density of overlapping threats. Orion finally realizes the problem is not that he is being opposed, it is that he is no longer being prioritized. His voice attempts to reassert structure, but when he speaks, the words land without reinforcement from the space itself. The sunblade flares in response, but the reaction is inconsistent, as if even the weapon is no longer fully synchronized with the authority it is meant to enforce. Dravok exhales heat. Valerius exhales cold. The two forces do not collide yet, but the space between them begins to show stress fractures in reality's interpretation of temperature. Zalthun tilts slightly, void waves tightening, mapping both as incompatible but coexisting destructive constants. Kalen's compass locks again, briefly showing him a result where neither survives contact with the next escalation. Silas's cyan armor emits a low harmonic pulse, not warning, but acknowledgement that the system has reached a threshold of multi-domain instability. Beneath all of it, the tavern responds in the only way it ever does when equilibrium becomes impossible to maintain. It prepares to make something happen. No one moves immediately, and that hesitation is more dangerous than action. The room is no longer divided by allegiance or ideology, but by pressure systems that overlap without agreeing on priority. Orion still stands at what he believes is the center, but the center has stopped behaving like a privileged position. The sunblade continues to burn in corrupted yellow instability, flickering as though even its light is unsure what it is meant to represent. Vexus remains nearby, but his stance is no longer mirrored obedience. It is conditional proximity, as if he is already calculating exit paths that do not require loyalty as input. Zalthun remains still, and that stillness is now active influence. The burgundy void waves do not expand or retract, they simply persist, and in doing so they continue to strip certainty from everything they touch. Dravok's presence continues to radiate heat distortion that bends perception around him, while Valerius counters from the opposite side with cold erosion that destabilizes structural continuity. Between them, the air becomes increasingly difficult to interpret as a single consistent medium. Kalen's temporal compass tightens its behavior further, no longer showing branching chaos but narrowing inevitability. His aged right hand is steady now, not relaxed but prepared, as if accepting that whatever comes next is no longer avoidable through observation alone. Bram's molten iron arm shifts slightly, heat pulsing in controlled rhythm that suggests containment is failing as a strategy. Silas remains grounded, cyan-armored lower body locked into the architecture, but even his stability now reads as a held boundary rather than dominance. Seraphina and Morvath speak within him again, but their disagreement has become procedural rather than interpretive, as if both are now operating under the assumption that escalation is already underway regardless of input. Gideon stands motionless, his awareness fully displaced from vision into pressure reading, and what he perceives is not individuals preparing to fight, but systems preparing to override each other. Maeve's magic flickers again, weaker now, cherry blossom energy struggling to maintain form in an environment that is beginning to suppress expressive coherence. Cal's rifle is steady, but even his steadiness now feels like it is being compressed by the density of competing threat signatures. Orion finally attempts decisive reassertion. The sunblade flares sharply, a sudden spike of corrupted yellow light that pushes outward with forced authority, and for a moment the space reacts in kind, stone tightening, architecture attempting to comply, reality briefly acknowledging imposed structure. His voice follows immediately, sharper now, stripped of ceremony. Submit or be removed. For the first time, the sentence lands fully, but not as command. It lands as a trigger. Zalthun responds instantly, and the burgundy waves contract rather than expand, collapsing inward toward Orion's assertion instead of dispersing it. The effect is immediate and visible. The sunblade's flare fractures at its core, light splitting into inconsistent layers that no longer reinforce a single meaning. Dravok shifts his weight forward slightly, heat intensifying. Valerius responds in equal opposition, cold deepening, the abyssal purple blade subtly reacting, as if recognizing proximity to thermal extremes. Kaelin's compass locks onto a single branching outcome that resolves too quickly to be reassuring. Bram exhales once, molten arm steadying into readiness rather than restraint. Silas's cyan armor emits a low, structural resonance that suggests threshold detection rather than warning. And then, for the first time since arrival, the tavern does not escalate externally. It escalates internally. The architecture subtly reinterprets itself as a closed system, and every presence in the room is quietly reclassified not as participants, but as interacting variables inside a containment equation that has already begun solving itself. The realization does not arrive as a thought. It arrives as a change in how resistance behaves. The tavern is no longer simply holding them in place. It is beginning to define them as a closed system, one where every presence is treated as a variable interacting within a contained equation rather than independent actors with intent. The architecture does not visibly shift, but the feeling of space subtly tightens, as if distance itself has become more expensive to maintain. Orion senses it first in the sun blade. The corrupted yellow light no longer pushes outward cleanly. It diffuses at the edges, absorbed into something that does not reflect authority back to him. His stance stiffens, not from confidence but from recognition that his commands are no longer structurally privileged. Vexus remains near him, but the ash-blackened lizard's attention is no longer anchored to Orion's voice. It is distributed, scanning the room as if recalculating allegiance based on survival probability rather than hierarchy. Zalthun does not move, but their presence expands in function rather than size. The burgundy void waves do not push outward, they refine inward, mapping interactions instead of individuals. Dravok's heat becomes a pressure field rather than an aura, distorting nearby geometry in predictable but hostile ways. Valerius's cold erosion counters it, and between them the space begins to develop instability not from violence, but from incompatible environmental laws occupying the same volume. Kaelin's temporal compass tightens its behavior again, no longer offering branches, but compressing outcomes into shorter, sharper sequences. His aged right hand remains steady now, fully engaged, as if accepting that time here will not offer warning before consequence. Bram shifts once, molten iron arm lowering slightly as the heat stabilizes into controlled readiness. Silas remains grounded in cyan armor, but even his stability now reads as containment pressure rather than authority. Seraphina and Morvath speak in overlapping contradiction, but both voices are quieter now, as if the system is reducing noise rather than resolving disagreement. Gideon stands motionless, perception fully converted into pressure and absence. What he sees is not shapes or people, but converging stress lines across reality itself. Maeve's cherry blossom magic flickers again, weaker, more fragile, struggling to maintain expression in an environment that is beginning to penalize coherence. Cal adjusts his stance slightly, but the motion is constrained, as if even his sniper logic is being forced to operate under reduced interpretive freedom. Orion attempts to speak again, but the room no longer fully receives him as a command source. The sunblade still burns, but its output is inconsistent, like a signal attempting to assert dominance in a system that is no longer prioritizing its frequency. "You will," he begins, and then hesitates for the first time because the sentence does not complete itself with the same certainty it used to carry. Zalthun tilts their head, not toward Orion, toward the space between everyone. And the tavern responds, not with sound or motion, but with finality and structure. The room acknowledges that all present entities have now been successfully compiled into a single operational environment. No exits remain defined, only interactions, and the system prepares to observe which interaction becomes irreversible first. The moment the tavern finishes defining them as a closed system, the air changes in a way that cannot be described as movement or silence. It is instead a reweighting of consequence, as if every action from this point forward now carries equal visibility to something that has been waiting for input. Orion feels it as a loss before anything physically happens. The sunblade still burns in corrupted yellow, but the flame no longer feels like it belongs to him alone. It feels shared with something that does not care whether he survives holding it. Vexus shifts again, and this time it is not alignment or hesitation, it is repositioning. His SH-blackened form moves a fraction farther from Orion than before, subtle enough to be deniable, but no longer ambiguous in intent. Zalthun remains still, but their burgundy void waves now behave like a lens rather than a field, focusing attention rather than dispersing it. And in that focus, every presence in the room feels slightly more exposed than before. Dravok's heat continues to distort the environment in slow pulses, while Valerius's cold erosion stabilizes its counterpressure, and the space between them begins to form a thin, unstable boundary where physics feels negotiated rather than fixed. Kalen's temporal compass locks again, showing him a compressed sequence of events that feels less like prediction and more like inevitability arriving early. His aged right hand remains steady, ready, no longer reacting to instability but anticipating outcome. Bram exhales once, molten iron arm lowering into a position that suggests he is no longer preparing for a single opponent, but for a systemic collapse of structure itself. Silas remains grounded, Scion armor firm, but even his presence now reads as a controlled anchor resisting upward pull from a destabilizing field. Seraphina and Morvath continue speaking within him, but their tone has shifted into synchronized urgency rather than contradiction. Gideon stands still, but the pressure lines he perceives across reality are no longer evenly distributed. They are converging towards specific points of failure. Maeve's cherry blossom magic flickers again, weaker still, petals of light forming and dissolving almost immediately as if the environment is refusing to allow sustained expression. Cal's posture tightens, his remaining arm adjusting grip on the rifle with precision that now feels like adaptation rather than dominance, as if even distance-based control is being eroded by density of presence. Orion finally moves first. It is not an attack. It is an assertion of motion designed to reestablish hierarchy through initiative. The sunblade follows immediately, flaring in corrupted yellow intensity as he swings it outward, not toward a specific target but into the space itself, attempting to force reaction from the environment. For a brief moment, the architecture responds again, stone tightening, air resisting, the room acknowledging force as input. But Zalthun interrupts that acknowledgement simply by existing within it. The burgundy void waves compress inward again, not striking Orion but stripping definition from the space his action depends on. The sunblade's flare fractures mid-output, its light splitting unevenly as if the concept of commanded action is no longer fully translatable here. Vexus reacts instantly, not to Orion but to the instability itself, stepping away a full half position, no longer even pretending that proximity guarantees safety. Dravok shifts forward by a fraction, and the air burns hotter in response. Valerius answers with a colder counter-erosion, and the boundary between them destabilizes further, introducing a third layer of conflict that is purely environmental. Kaelin's temporal compass snaps tight again, and this time the compressed outcome shows him containing no clean resolution, only branching collapse points that end in rapid failure states. Bram's molten arm rises slightly, heat steadying into controlled readiness. Silas remains grounded, but his cyan armor emits a deeper resonance, as if locking structural integrity against escalating pressure. Gideon finally turns his head slightly, not toward any individual, but toward the point where all forces are beginning to intersect. He does not speak, because there is nothing verbal left that would accurately describe what is forming. Maeve's cherry blossom magic flickers one last time in this moment, and the petals do not bloom fully. They collapse mid-formation. The tavern, observing the first true contact between competing systems, begins preparing the next correction step, without yet revealing what form correction will take. The tavern no longer feels like a space they occupy. It feels like a system actively testing how long incompatible forces can coexist before one of them must fail. Orion's attempt to assert motion lingers in the air like a discarded instruction, and even though the sunblade still burns with corrupted yellow intensity, its output is no longer singular. It fractures slightly every time it expands, as if the concept of authority is being divided before it can fully express itself. Zalthun does not advance or react, but their presence continues to refine the battlefield in subtle ways. The burgundy void waves now behave less like detection and more like constraint mapping, outlining where certainty breaks under pressure. Vexus has fully stopped mirroring Orion's positioning. His ash-blackened form now occupies space with hesitation that borders on calculation, as if every step is being weighed against survival outcomes rather than command structure. Dravok's heat field continues to pulse outward in slow, destructive rhythm, and Valerius's cold erosion pushes back against it without engagement, creating a destabilized boundary where neither force wins but both alter the environment. Kaelin's temporal compass locks again, this time holding longer than before, showing him a condensed sequence of collapse points rather than branching futures. His aged right hand is steady now, not relaxed but fully engaged, as if it has accepted that reaction time here is meaningless compared to anticipation. Bram shifts into a more grounded stance, molten iron arm held slightly forward, heat stabilized into controlled readiness that no longer reads as aggression, but as preparedness for systemic failure. Silas remains anchored in luminous cyan armor, and even though he does not move, his presence feels like resistance against a rising pressure that is no longer directional but structural. Seraphina and Morvath continue speaking within him, but their tone has converged into urgency, no longer debating interpretation but coordinating response. Gideon stands motionless, yet his perception is fully active. He reads not individuals but convergence points where multiple forces intersect and strain reality. Maeve's cherry blossom magic flickers again, weaker than before, petals forming only to dissolve mid-expression, as though the environment is beginning to reject sustained symbolic manifestation. Cal remains steady in his altered stance, rifle held with precision that now feels less like dominance and more like adaptation to a battlefield where distance is no longer a reliable concept. Orion tries again to reassert structure, but the attempt no longer lands cleanly. The sunblade flares, but the flare is inconsistent, breaking into uneven segments of light that do not fully reinforce each other. His voice follows, but it does not carry the same enforced weight. It disperses slightly in the air before reaching full impact, as if the space itself is no longer prioritizing his input as authoritative. Zalthun tilts their head once, and the burgundy void waves compress inward again, not as an attack but as refinement. The effect is immediate. Orion's output loses coherence mid-expression, and the concept of command no longer stabilizes the environment around him. Vexus takes another step back, no longer subtle, no longer deniable, his position now clearly outside strict alignment. Dravok's heat pulses intensify briefly, and Valerius's cold responds in equal opposition, destabilizing the boundary between them further. Kaelin's compass tightens again, locking onto a sequence where escalation becomes unavoidable within the next interaction cycle. Bram exhales slowly, molten arm steady, while Silas's cyan armor emits a deeper harmonic resonance, as if reinforcing containment against structural overload. Gideon finally shifts his focus slightly upward, not toward any one entity, but toward the convergence point, where all competing forces are beginning to overlap in the same narrow window of space. And for the first time since arrival, the tavern does not simply observe them as individuals acting within a system. It begins preparing the first forced outcome. The shift is subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but every entity in the room feels it at the same moment. The tavern is no longer just containing them, it is beginning to sequence them. Actions are no longer independent. They are being arranged into a chain that is narrowing toward a single, unavoidable interaction. Orion senses it as resistance against his authority, but also something deeper. His authority is no longer being opposed directly. It is being deprioritized entirely. The sunblade still burns in corrupted yellow, but its output now lags slightly behind intent, as if the space is delaying permission for full expression. Vexus notices it too, not as a thought but as a behavioral change in the environment, and his position shifts again, no longer anchored to Orion but floating in conditional proximity that could break at any moment. Zalthun remains still, but their burgundy void waves tighten further, refining rather than expanding, and in doing so they begin to expose the underlying structure of the room like a map being peeled out of reality. Dravok's heat continues its rhythmic distortion, but it is no longer purely dominant. Valerius's cold erosion intersects it more cleanly now, and the boundary between them becomes sharper, more defined, like two opposing laws beginning to stabilize into contact rather than chaos. Kaelin's temporal compass locks longer this time, and what he sees is not branching outcomes but a compressed inevitability chain, each link shorter than the last. His aged right hand remains steady, fully engaged, no longer reacting but anticipating collapse timing. Bram adjusts his stance again, molten iron arm held at a controlled angle that suggests he is no longer preparing for individual engagement, but for systemic shock. Silas remains grounded, cyan-armored lower body unmoving, but his resonance deepens as if responding to pressure building beneath the architecture itself. Seraphina and Morvath speak in near unison now, their disagreement reduced to operational urgency rather than interpretation. Gideon stands still, but his awareness is fully mapped across the room's pressure lines, and what he perceives is no longer movement but convergence density. Maeve's cherry blossom magic flickers again, weaker still, petals forming only as incomplete impressions before collapsing into nothing. Cal tightens his grip on the rifle, but even that motion feels compressed now, as if the space is reducing variance in all forms of precision. Distance is no longer a stable advantage, it is becoming an unstable variable. Orion attempts a final assertion of structure. The sunblade flares sharply, corrupted yellow light pushing outward in a sudden surge that briefly forces the architecture to react again, stone tightening and air resisting, as if acknowledging input. All entities will align, he declares, but the sentence fractures midway through its own execution, dispersing unevenly into the space rather than stabilizing it. Zalthun responds not with motion but with compression. The burgundy void waves collapse inward again, and this time the effect is immediate and irreversible in function. Orion's declaration fails to propagate beyond its point of origin. It does not echo. It does not reinforce. It simply stops becoming meaningful past the initial utterance. Vexus fully breaks from alignment now, taking a clear half-step away, no longer ambiguous in intent. Dravok's heat spikes briefly, Valerius's cold deepens in response, and the boundary between them stabilizes into a thin but dangerous equilibrium. Kaelin's compass locks fully, showing a single narrowed outcome path where escalation must occur within moments or the system will resolve without them. Bram exhales, molten arm steady and ready. Silas's cyan armor emits a low harmonic tone that suggests the containment threshold nearing limit. Gideon tilts his head slightly upward again, and this time it is not observation but recognition. The convergence point has been identified by the system itself, and everything in the room is being gently but irrevocably guided toward it. The tavern, having completed its sequencing, allows the first forced interaction to begin forming at the edges of reality. The tavern stops feeling like it is arranging possibilities and starts feeling like it is enforcing proximity. Not by force in any visible sense, but by removing the space between outcomes until only a few remain physically possible. The room subtly compresses in meaning, and every presence inside it begins to feel closer to everything else, whether they move or not. Orion feels it first as a loss of dominance in motion. The sunblade still burns in corrupted yellow, but when he tries to project authority again, the space does not reinforce it. It simply absorbs it, flattening the impact before it can spread. Vexus notices this immediately and no longer remains even conditionally aligned. He shifts further away, positioning himself as if preparing to survive outcomes rather than participate in command. Zalthun remains still, but their burgundy void waves tighten further, and the effect is no longer observational. It is directive, subtly pulling every unstable force in the room toward shared points of contact. Dravok's heat field pulses again, but this time it does not expand outward freely. It collides almost immediately with Valerius's cold erosion, and instead of dispersing into chaos, the two forces lock into a thin, unstable equilibrium zone that begins to define a physical boundary in the air. Kaelin's temporal compass snaps into a single locked sequence. There are no branches left that matter anymore, only timing. His aged right hand steadies completely, not trembling, not hesitating, but prepared as if it already knows the exact instant everything shifts. Bram adjusts his stance in response to that shift, molten iron arm angled forward with controlled heat rather than reactive force. Silas remains grounded, cyan-armored lower body unmoving, but his resonance deepens sharply as if the architecture beneath them is reaching a structural limit. Seraphina and Morveth both speak at once inside him, but now their disagreement has resolved into execution priority rather than interpretation, both aligned on one fact: the system is forcing engagement. Gideon senses it before he understands it. The pressure lines he reads across the room no longer diverge, they converge. Every force present, heat, void, time instability, cold erosion, corrupted authority, precision distance, is being gently but inevitably drawn toward a shared intersection point. Maeve's cherry blossom magic flickers again, weaker still, and this time the petals do not even attempt full formation. They fail immediately upon creation, as if expression itself is being filtered out of acceptable outcomes. Cal tightens his grip on the rifle, but even that motion now feels compressed, like precision is no longer an independent variable, but something being forced into synchronization with the room. Orion attempts one final assertion of control. The sunblade surges in corrupted yellow intensity, forcing a brief spike of light that actually succeeds in pushing the architecture back for a fraction of a second. "Submit," he commands, and for the first time the word almost becomes real, but only almost. Zalthun tilts their head. The burgundy void waves compress inward. The space between forces collapses. Dravok and Valerius finally meet at the edge of their equilibrium boundary, not in a delayed confrontation, but in enforced contact as the tavern removes the remaining distance between incompatible extremes. Heat and cold collide directly for the first time without delay, and the resulting impact is no longer theoretical. It is immediate. It is irreversible. It is the first true act of violence the tavern has allowed to complete itself. The instant Dravok's heat and Valerius's cold make full contact, the tavern does not explode outward, it adapts inward. The collision is not treated as chaos but as data, as if the space has finally received the first meaningful input it has been waiting for. The boundary between their forces does not shatter, it stabilizes in rupture, locking into a violent equilibrium that tears a thin scar through the air where reality struggles to decide whether temperature is a concept or a weapon. Dravok does not step back. His molten, weaponized arms push forward through the thermal resistance, heat surging in rhythmic pulses that attempt to overwhelm Valerius's cold erosion through volume and force. Valerius responds not with escalation but refinement. His abyssal purple blade absorbs and redirects the pressure, converting destructive heat into structural decay that spreads outward in controlled fractures. Neither force dominates. Instead, the space between them becomes a living compromise of destruction, and that compromise begins to radiate instability into everything nearby. Orion reacts instinctively, sunblade flaring in corrupted yellow as he tries to reassert order over the disruption. But the moment his authority attempts to engage the clash, it is partially absorbed by it. The tavern does not prioritize him anymore. It prioritizes the interaction between extremes. Vexus notices this and moves further away, fully abandoning proximity to power in favor of proximity to survivability. His ash-blackened form now clearly detached from Orion's influence. Zai none remain still, but their burgundy void waves sharpen again, and now they are not just mapping the battlefield, they are indexing it. Every force, every interaction, every instability is being cataloged in real time. Kalen's temporal compass locks harder than before. He is no longer seeing multiple futures. He is seeing a narrowing sequence of forced interactions, each one occurring faster than the last. His aged right hand remains steady, ready for the exact moment the sequence collapses further. Bram shifts forward half a step, molten iron arm rising slightly as if instinctively preparing to intervene, but the heat from Dravok and the cold from Valerius already make the space too unstable for clean engagement. Silas remains grounded, cyan-armored lower body anchored firmly, but his resonance now vibrates at a deeper frequency, signaling that the architecture beneath them is responding directly to sustained cross-force interaction. Seraphina and Morvath both go silent for a brief moment, then resume speaking in absolute agreement. Containment is no longer possible. Only participation remains. Gideon feels the shift as pressure convergence becomes directional force. What was once a field of competing influences is now beginning to move toward shared resolution points, not naturally but structurally enforced. Maeve's cherry blossom magic flickers again, and this time nothing forms at all. The concept of expression itself is thinning in her presence. Cal adjusts his rifle slightly, but even his precision feels compressed into the same narrowing system, as if distance is no longer a choice but a shrinking variable. Orion tries again to assert structure, but the sunblade's corrupted yellow light now flickers unpredictably, its output partially consumed by the ongoing Dravok Valerius interaction. His command does not fully form before it begins to degrade. The space no longer treats his authority as a stabilizing input. It treats it as background noise competing with higher priority systems. Zalthun tilts their heads slightly, and the burgundy void waves compress inward once more. The tavern responds to the collision by doing something it has not done yet. It accelerates the next contact. The tavern stops compressing possibility and instead begins selecting it. Not gently, not subtly, precisely. The space no longer feels like it is waiting for violence to emerge. It feels like it is deciding where violence must occur to keep the system stable. Dravok and Valerius remain locked in their destructive equilibrium, heat and cold grinding against each other in a narrowing band of fractured reality. The contact point between them is no longer expanding. It is stabilizing into a pressure seam that threatens to propagate outward. Every pulse of Dravok's molten force is immediately met and partially erased by Valerius's abyssal cold, and every counterpressure strengthens the boundary rather than breaking it. The result is not an explosion, but containment under strain. Orion tries to capitalize on it. The sunblade flares in corrupted yellow, but the moment he directs it toward control rather than defense, the tavern deprioritizes him again. His authority does not fail. It simply stops being structurally relevant in the presence of higher priority interactions. Vexus sees it clearly now and fully detaches from him, stepping into independent positioning with no hesitation. The hierarchy is gone, only systems remain. Zalthun remains still, but their burgundy void waves now act like a targeting lattice, subtly aligning all present forces toward intersection points that minimize systemic delay. Kalen's temporal compass locks hard, no branching, no divergence, only timing compression. His aged right hand steadies completely, and this time it is not readiness for reaction, it is readiness for inevitability. Bram shifts, molten iron arm rising slightly, but he does not commit. Silas stays grounded, cyan-armored lower body locked in place, resonance deepening into a steady harmonic that suggests the architecture itself is now under load stress. Seraphina and Morvath both speak at once, but not in disagreement, confirmation. The system is about to force a decisive input. Gideon feels it as convergence becoming directional collapse, all pressure lines now pointing toward a single emergent resolution event. Maeve's magic flickers once, no bloom, no petals, just failure of formation. Cal tightens his grip on the rifle. Then the tavern makes its selection. A micro-shift in spatial priority exposes a narrow line of sight, an accidental corridor formed by the momentary misalignment of Dravok's heat distortion and Valerius's cold erosion. It is not an opening created by skill or choice. It is an enforced gap in the system's own instability. Cal sees it, not as an opportunity, as permission. He fires. The shot is not loud in the conventional sense. It is final. Single, precise trajectory cutting through compressed space, passing through heat distortion, slicing across the cold boundary, and embedding itself in the destabilized equilibrium between Dravok and Valerius. For a fraction of a second, nothing happens. Then the equilibrium breaks, not explosively outward, but inward. The seam collapses. The tavern registers the first blood. The impact of Cal's shot does not create a blast. It creates a decision point in reality that can no longer be postponed. The round threads through the already fractured equilibrium between Dravok's heat and Valerius's cold, not overpowering either force but interrupting the structure holding them in balance. The seam they formed, once a stable line of mutual annihilation, fractures inward like glass losing its internal tension. Heat and cold do not disperse outward. They fold into each other, collapsing in on the exact point of contact where the bullet lands. Dravok stumbles half a step forward for the first time since arrival, not from injury alone, but from the sudden loss of resistance that had been allowing him to push forward at all. Valerius reacts at the same instant, his abyssal purple blade tightening as the cold erosion he was channeling loses its opposing anchor. The space between them implodes into a narrow pocket of unstable nothingness that immediately resolves into violent thermal feedback. but it is too late to restore the equilibrium. Orion senses the shift and tries to seize it. The sunblade erupts in corrupted yellow brilliance, but the surge is misaligned. There is no stable structure left for his authority to attach to. The tavern does not reject him directly. It simply stops recognizing his input as causally dominant. His command passes through the system without anchoring. Vexus, now fully detached, uses the moment to reposition again, moving towards structural cover rather than alignment with any faction. Zalthun remains still, but their burgundy void waves tighten sharply, and the lattice they form updates instantly, recording Cal's shot not as an attack, but as a system trigger event. Kalen's temporal compass locks violently. This is no longer a prediction. It is a compression into inevitability. His aged right hand remains perfectly steady, but now it feels less like control and more like acceptance of a fixed outcome sequence that has already begun executing itself. Bram moves instinctively toward Dravok's destabilized position, molten iron arm rising as if to contain secondary collapse, but the heat field is no longer stable enough to support intervention. Silas remains grounded, cyan armor resonating at a deeper frequency as the architecture registers cascading instability across multiple vectors. Serafina and Morvath both fall silent for a fraction of a second, then speak in synchronized urgency. The system is entering a chain reaction state. Gideon feels it as a single continuous pressure line snapping into motion across the entire battlefield. Every force, heat, cold, void mapping, temporal compression, corrupted authority, and precision distance has now been touched by a single causal break. Maeve's magic does not flicker this time. It simply stops attempting to form. Cal lowers the rifle slightly, not in relief, but in recognition that the shot did not end anything. It started something that is no longer under individual control. Dravok and Valerius separate, not by choice, but because the system can no longer maintain their coupled interaction. The equilibrium that held them is gone, and what replaces it is not freedom, but cascading instability propagating outward from the collapse point. The tavern registers the event fully, not as damaged, as a progression. The collapse point left by Cal's shot doesn't fade, it propagates. The tavern treats the broken equilibrium between Dravok and Valerius as a template rather than a wound, and the result is immediate structural reorganization across the entire arena. Space does not expand or contract, it reassigns stability priorities. Every presence in the room feels it as a sudden change in how reality chooses to hold itself together. Dravok regains footing first, but the heat surrounding him is no longer purely dominant. It now fluctuates in response to missing resistance, as if the system is compensating for the removed counterforce. Valerius steadies almost simultaneously, but his cold erosion no longer pushes against a stable boundary. It now spreads unevenly, reacting to the absence of pressure rather than opposition. Neither is weaker, but both are now unanchored. Orion attempts to reclaim the gap left by their separation. The sunblade flares in corrupted yellow intensity again, but the output is no longer authoritative. It disperses partially into the space before forming impact, as if the tavern is filtering his command through competing higher priority processes. His presence is still visible, still active, but no longer structurally privileged. Vexus remains disengaged from all command structures, fully operating on environmental reading alone. He shifts again, moving toward zones of lower instability rather than allegiance. Zalthun remains still, but their burgundy void waves now behave like a full system overlay, mapping the entire battlefield as a single evolving equation. Every action, every force, every residual instability is being recorded as part of a larger recursive pattern. Kalen's temporal compass locks into a single continuous line. There are no branches left in his perception, only a narrowing forward sequence that accelerates with each passing second. His aged right hand remains steady, fully aligned with that inevitability. Bram moves again, but cautiously now, molten iron arm held in a containment posture rather than offensive readiness. Sila's remains grounded, cyan-armored lower body resonating deeply as the architecture itself begins to redistribute load stress across multiple points of failure. Serafina and Morvath speak in perfect synchronization now, no longer interpreting but confirming. The system is transitioning from isolated interaction events into chained cascade behavior. Gideon feels it as pressure lines across reality beginning to move in coordinated flow rather than scattered convergence. Maeve's magic remains absent. There is no longer even failed formation, only suppression of expression. Cal holds the rifle steady, but does not fire again. The first shot has already been absorbed into the system's learning cycle. Dravok takes a step forward. Valerius responds without hesitation. But the space between them no longer behaves as a battleground. It behaves as a memory of impact. Their movements no longer define the system. The system defines how their movements are allowed to resolve. Orion tries once more to assert control, but the Sunblade's corrupted light fractures immediately upon expansion, and for the first time, even his posture begins to reflect uncertainty rather than authority. The recalibration does not end with understanding. It ends with movement. The tavern responds to Cal's shot, and the Dravok Valerius collapse by changing the rules of contact entirely. The floor beneath them does not simply give way, it is reclassified as a non-essential structure. Stone loses its permission to remain stable. It drops. The entire arena fractures downward in violent segments, massive slabs of Gothic architecture tearing loose and falling into an unseen depth below. The walls do not follow clean collapse patterns. They shift sideways mid-fall, reorienting as if the space is being reassembled in real time while they are still inside it. Gravity becomes inconsistent, pulling in overlapping directions that force bodies and debris into unpredictable arcs of motion. Orion is thrown off balance immediately as the Sunblade's corrupted light fails to stabilize the ground beneath him. Vexus drops into a lateral shift, using a falling column as cover rather than attempting control. Zalthun remains suspended in perception rather than position, burgundy void waves adjusting to the new geometry, as if the collapse is simply another layer of data being added to the system. Dravok lands hard on a shifting slab of stone, molten heat flaring outward as impact fractures the surface further. Valerius is already moving mid-fall, abyssal purple blade carving into falling debris to redirect momentum rather than resist it. Cal braces instinctively, but the terrain beneath his remaining footing disintegrates into segmented collapse, forcing him into a controlled drop through layered rubble. Kalen reacts first in true action rather than observation. His aged right hand lifts, not in strain, but in command of something the tavern still recognizes as temporal authority. The moment falling debris begins to accelerate past survivable chaos thresholds, he freezes it. Time locks in a localized pocket around collapsing stone and airborne fragments, not stopping the entire environment, but arresting a critical section of it mid-fall. Massive chunks of architecture hang suspended, dust and shattered stone locked in violent stillness. Kalen's hand trembles for the first time under sustained strain, but it holds, just long enough. Bram moves immediately into that frozen space. His molten iron arm ignites with controlled force, not wild heat but directed forge pressure. He swings. The hammer impact is not just physical, it is structural correction. Frozen debris shatters along controlled fracture lines, carving a temporary corridor through suspended ruin. Stone breaks clean under molten reinforcement, redirecting collapse paths into usable structure rather than chaotic descent. Move, Bram roars, and for the first time it is not commentary. It is instruction that carries physical consequence. Gideon does not hesitate. Even without sight, he reads the shift in pressure and follows the opening Bram creates. Maeve, still struggling to manifest any stable magic, is pulled through the collapsing geometry by Gideon's movement alone, as the cherry blossom remnants of her power flicker weakly around them like dying embers refusing to fully vanish. Kaelin releases the freeze the instant Bram's path is complete. The suspended debris resumes motion, but now along a carved trajectory rather than uncontrolled collapse. The corridor holds for only seconds, but it holds long enough. In that brief, violent clarity of survival, the tavern registers something new. Not a kill, not a collapse, a successful traversal through forced structural failure. The moment Kaelin releases the frozen debris, the corridor Bram carved doesn't just remain, it commits. The tavern stops treating the collapse as destruction and begins treating it as architecture. Falling stone realigns mid-descent into angled pathways, like the environment is deciding what kind of ruin it is allowed to become. Gideon is the first to recognize the change in pressure. It's not collapsing anymore, he says flatly, voice low but certain. It's choosing a shape. Maeve, still shaken, barely keeps pace beside him, her voice tight. That's not possible, that's not how anything works. Bram answers before anyone else can. It does here. Behind them, Kaelin's breathing is controlled but strained, his aged right hand still slightly elevated as if it remembers the cost of holding time. I won't get a second freeze like that easily, he warns. If I do it again, I might not let go at the right moment. Silas's voice cuts in from the side, steady and analytical. Then we don't waste it. Movement only, no hesitation. The corridor shifts again as if reacting to their decision to continue forward. Stone edges sharpen into clearer pathways, debris stabilizing just long enough to allow traversal. It feels less like survival and more like permission being gradually extended. Cal drops into the corridor from a fractured ledge above, landing with controlled impact despite the instability. He doesn't look at the group for long. You all felt that shot, he says, almost to himself. That wasn't just damage, that was a trigger. Gideon turns slightly toward the sound. It started this. Cal gives a short, bitter laugh. No, it answered something already running. A distant distortion ripples through the space above them. Dravok's heat pulses somewhere in the shifting ruins, followed immediately by Valerius's cold erosion reasserting itself. But now both feel diluted, redirected through the new geometry the tavern has formed. Orion's voice tries to rise again from somewhere in the chaos, but it is cut off by the environment itself reorganizing around the corridor's existence. Vexus appears briefly at the edge of falling structure, then vanishes again into a different layer of collapse, prioritizing escape routes over engagement. Zalthun remains unseen but present in implication, their burgundy void waves now threading through the corridor like a silent indexing system, marking every step, every reaction, every decision. Bram tightens his grip on his molten iron arm. This isn't random anymore, he says. It's building towards something. Kaelin responds without looking at him. It already was, we just forced it to show its hand. The corridor ahead narrows slightly, then stabilizes again, as if acknowledging their continued movement. For the first time since the summoning, the tavern does not escalate immediately. It waits for their next choice. The corridor stabilizes just long enough for them to understand the cost of surviving it. The tavern's grinding is no longer a distant environmental phenomenon. It is an active separation process, and it completes its first clean division the moment the corridor locks into place. Behind them, the collapsing arena fractures into incompatible layers of reality, sealing itself off through shifting geometry that no longer aligns with their path forward. The Void Syndicate's presence, Dravok's heat signatures, Valerius's cold erosion, Orion's corrupted light, Vexus's fractured positioning, and Zalthun's indexing void, are no longer part of the same navigable space. They are being partitioned out of reach. Gideon feels it first as silence where pressure used to exist. They're gone, he says, not as assumption, but as confirmation of structural absence. Maeve turns slightly, panic tightening her voice. That means we're cut off from them. Bram answers immediately, voice low and grounded. No, it means the tavern decided we don't stay in the same system anymore. Silas's cyan-armored lower body hums with deeper resonance as he analyzes the corridor's geometry. It's not just separation, he says. It's containment partitioning. Two active environments, no overlap layer. Serafina immediately responds, calm and precise. Correct. We are inside a sealed operational instance. Think of it as reality segmenting itself to prevent cross-interference. Morveth snorts from the opposite shoulder, voice dry and amused. Or we're in a fancy box it built so we stop breaking its toys too quickly. Serafina snaps back without missing a beat. That is not an accurate analogy. Morveth replies, it's a better one. Silas exhales through his teeth and mutters, can you both be useful and quiet for once? Both voices answer at the same time, no. Silas sighs, clearly regretting every decision that led to having internal commentary that refuses basic discipline. Kaelin's aged right hand lowers slightly, still tense but no longer actively exerting temporal strain. So we're the stable group, he mutters, or the controlled one. Cal adjusts his stance, keeping his rifle close with his single remaining hand while his severed right shoulder shifts from the earlier landing impact. Or the one it expects to survive longer, he adds. The corridor ahead tightens briefly, then expands again, responding to their continued movement. It is no longer collapsing or stabilizing randomly, it is guiding. Every step forward reinforces the separation behind them as if distance itself is being converted into structural certainty. Maeve swallows hard. I don't like being on the safe side of something like this. Bram gives a short, humorless exhale. It's not safe, it's just delayed consequences. Gideon listens quietly, then speaks. We're not separated from them because we escaped. We're separated because interaction between us and them is no longer part of the same calculation. Silas nods once. Good. That means we can move without interference. Kaelin looks forward into the narrowing corridor. It also means whatever comes next is designed specifically for us now. A distant distortion echoes through the partitioned space behind them. Faint heat, fractured cold, and unstable light signals bleeding through briefly before sealing off completely. Then silence returns, absolute and enforced. The radiant Aegis continues forward alone, fully contained within a corridor that no longer shares physics with what they left behind. The corridor does not continue so much as it resolves. The narrowing passage ahead stabilizes into a vast, cathedral-like expanse carved directly from shifting geometry, as if the tavern has finally decided what shape this instance is allowed to take. The radiant Aegis steps forward into it together, and the moment they fully cross the threshold, the space behind them seals without sound, without collapse, without warning, as though it was never a passage at all but a one-time decision point that has now expired. Gideon is the first to feel it change. The pressure lines he has been reading since the collapse do not simply stop, they reorient. We're not on a corridor anymore, he says quietly. Bram's molten iron arm lowers slightly as he surveys the new space. No, Bram replies, we're on a floor. Silas's cyan-armored lower body hums in confirmation as he scans the environment. Instance boundary fully stabilized. This is a contained level state. Kaelin's aged right hand tightens again, not in strain but recognition. His temporal compass does not branch this time. It locks onto a single point ahead. We're being pointed somewhere, he says. Maeve steps closer instinctively, her voice lower now. That doesn't feel like guidance. Cal adjusts his stance, rifle held steady in his remaining hand, eyes tracking the vast open geometry ahead. It isn't, he says, it's positioning. The space ahead shifts, not violently, intentionally. At the far end of the cathedral-like expanse, the architecture begins to assemble itself into something denser, heavier, more structured than anything they have encountered so far. Stone layers fold inward like overlapping shields. Light collapses into a central axis. The air becomes weighted not with pressure but with expectation. Zalthun's influence is gone from here, but something else fills the absence immediately, something older in function and more direct in purpose. Seraphina speaks first, voice tight with analytical certainty. This is not environmental, this is custodial. Morveth answers almost immediately, quieter than usual. Yeah, that's not a room, that's a correction mechanism. The structure at the far end finishes assembling, and it acknowledges them, not with speech, not with motion, but with classification. The entire floor registers the radiant aegis as a complete unit of persistent anomaly and begins its first corrective response protocol. From the center of the cathedral expanse, the white mechanic manifests, not yet as a fully defined entity, but as a layered enforcement system taking shape. It is not one being, but a convergence of punitive architecture, a towering composite presence built from collapsed rule sets, fractured enforcement logic, and failed prior instances of survival attempts. Its outer silhouette resembles a kneeling cathedral made of broken mirrored stone, its head a rotating halo of segmented judgment plates, each etched with erased faction sigils from past culls. Between the shifting plates, brief flashes of previous failed guilds flicker like trapped echoes, suggesting this is not the first time a Radiant-like faction has reached this point. It watches them without eyes. Kaelin's compass locks so hard his arm visibly tenses. "That's not a boss," he says under his breath. Bram shifts forward slightly, molten heat beginning to rise in controlled pulses. "No," Bram says, "that's a punishment system." Gideon stands still, but his voice is absolute. "It's the floor deciding we've existed too long without failing." The white mechanic completes its first adaptive phase, and the floor prepares to enforce its first correction against the radiant aegis. The Broken Tavern. The Chapter 1 Finale. Page 22 splash. Chapter 2 The Dark Instance Void Syndicate. The tavern does not separate them gently. It deletes continuity for Zalthun, Orion, Vexus, Dravok, and Valerius. There is no corridor, no stabilization phase, no curated cathedral floor. There is only impact. Reality returns as a violent absence of light. Orion hits the ground first, armor scraping against jagged non-Euclidean stone that feels less like architecture and more like discarded structural memory. His sunblade ignites automatically in corrupted yellow, but the glow does not illuminate anything beyond immediate reach. The darkness here is not visual. It is positional, swallowing light as soon as it exists. Vexus lands harder than ash-blackened scales, scraping as he rolls through fractured elevation shifts that immediately reconfigure beneath him. "This is not the same floor," he hisses, voice tight with recognition. "We were split." Dravok does not land so much as he has fused weaponized great axe arms, striking the stone and dispersing heat outward in a violent pulse that briefly reveals the truth of the space. This is not a room, but a collapsing lattice of half-formed kill zones, layered on top of each other. Like stacked executions, his molten fury reacts instinctively. But there is no stable ground to dominate, only shifting enforcement geometry that refuses to remain still long enough to burn Valerius' steadies. Himself last, his flayed exposed skull gleaming faintly as his abyssal purple blade is already half raised. But even his cold erosion behaves differently. Here it does not push outward. It dissipates as if the space is consuming reaction before it can complete. And then Zalthun lands without sound. No impact, no shockwave, just presence. Their eyeless scar-split face tilts slightly as burgundy. Void currents begin mapping the environment in real time. Unlike before, there is no shared battlefield index. The system here is fragmented, unstable, and actively hostile to cohesion. It is not a floor designed to test them. It is a floor designed to erase them in pieces. A distant scream cuts through the shifting dark, not one of pain, but of sudden spatial deletion. Something else was already here. Before them, something did not last. Orion's voice tightens. This is not the grinding zone we saw, Vexus answers immediately, colder now. No, this is what happens after it stops being controlled. Dravok's flames flare once, then stabilize into a low, dangerous burn. Then we burn our way out. Valerius's voice is quieter. There is no out being offered. Zalthun finally speaks, voice layered with echolocation distortion. This is not a battlefield. A pause. Their void waves ripple outward, reading something beneath the surface of the shifting geometry. This is disposal architecture. The space beneath them shifts again, and something inside the darkness notices them back. The moment Zalthun finishes speaking,
watch some more
the environment reacts like a system rejecting a false assumption. Rather than acknowledging a statement, the darkness does not deepen, it tightens, collapsing inward in layered sheets of non-space.
Thank you all for watching. We'll stop there. An hour and 25 minutes in. I got some pizza. I put spaghetti in it. It's a 4-meat, sausage, beef, pepperoni, Canadian bacon. And then I put some of my own homemade banana peppers on it. Some homemade jalapeno, canned jalapeno. And then some Angelo's spaghetti on top of it. Killer. It's loaded. Thank you all for watching.